All right, Christmas is right around the corner, and I think a lot of people are out shopping for gifts right now. Maybe you're shopping for watches. Now, there are a lot of different watches out there right now, which is really cool, but it can be confusing trying to figure out whether the watch you're looking at is actually a good value or if it's something that's going to last or you're going to like. And I'm going to do a two-part series on how to find a good watch and not get ripped off. So here's what I want to do in this guide. Let's say you know absolutely nothing about watches. You're looking at a watch online, you got its spec sheet in front of you. I'm going to show you 4 things to look for in that spec sheet that will give you a fairly good idea of whether or not this is a good quality watch you're looking at or whether it's a poor quality watch. So this is going to be a two-part guide focusing on how to narrow down whether or not the watch you're looking at is a good watch or a bad watch. Part 2, I'm going to go over brands, and I'm going to actually rank brands by tier level of whether I think it's a good brand to look at or whether it's one you should be careful of. All right, let's get into it. Hey guys, my name's Dave and this channel is Just the Watch. It's a channel about budget watch collecting, and I have been watch collecting for going on about 3 years now. And when I started, I knew almost nothing about watches. And these are all things that I have learned kind of along the way that I'm going to share with you guys. And primarily this is going to be focused on people who are kind of newer into either watch collecting or just want to figure out how to buy a good watch as a gift or for themselves. And so in that line, I want to talk about 4 things that I kind of always look for when I'm considering whether or not to purchase a watch. Now, a watch does not have to have all 4 of these things to be a good watch. In fact, there are a lot of watches that are lacking some of these things that are great watches. So don't cancel a watch out right away if it's lacking any of these 4 things. But if a watch does have all of these things, or maybe 3 out of 4 of these things, and it's at a price you're willing to pay, chances are it's going to be a pretty decent watch and it's one you might want to pull the trigger on. So what are the 4 things that I always look for in buying a watch? Number 1, a sapphire crystal. So if you talk about the glass that's on top of a watch, the most common one that you're going to find is called mineral crystal. This is far and above the most common watch crystal out there. And a lot of brands or advertisers are going to try and sell you this as a high-end feature, that this is like some scratch-resistant mineral crystal. Basically, all mineral crystal is the same. It is scratch-resistant. It's not easy to scratch, but a watch is in such a place on your wrist, typically for long periods of time, that if you get a watch with a mineral crystal, it will almost certainly scratch within the first year of wearing it, unless you're very careful. A sapphire crystal, on the other hand, is much harder. It's almost as hard as a diamond and almost impossible to scratch. You can get a watch with a sapphire crystal, you can have it for 10, 15, 20 years, and chances are you're not going to get a single scratch on the glass of that crystal, which is awesome. I hate having scratches on watches, especially dress watches. You know, if it's like a tool watch or a dive watch or something that's meant to be tough and rugged, I don't mind the scratches and nicks as much. But if it's something I want to look nice and sharp and clean, you definitely want a sapphire crystal. And sapphire crystals used to be much more of a high-end feature. They're starting to become more commonplace in sort of mid-level watches. Depending on where you look, sometimes you can even find them in watches for under $100, but most commonly you're going to find sapphire crystals in the $200 to $500 range. If you're spending $300 or more on a watch, it probably should have a sapphire crystal. And the other cool thing about sapphire crystals is that because they are kind of a premium feature, they do cost more. If the manufacturer of the watch went through the trouble to add a sapphire crystal to the watch, chances are they're not cutting corners on other areas as well. If they are trying to cut corners and drive costs down and produce a cheap watch, they're probably not going to throw a sapphire crystal in there. Now, there's one other thing you'll see is sapphire coated mineral crystal. This is slightly better than mineral crystal. However, I have owned those and I have scratched them within 2 to 3 years of owning them. So I don't know how much better than a mineral crystal it is, but it is a slight upgrade. Second thing to look for in a watch, look for a watch that has a Japanese or Swiss movement inside of it. Now we can talk about the difference between quartz and automatic or mechanical movements, and those are important, but if it is a quartz movement, if it's an automatic movement, if it's any kind of movement, whatever you're looking at, if it is either Swiss or Japanese made, chances are it's going to be a pretty reliable movement. Even the cheapest Japanese quartz movements will run for a long time, they'll be highly accurate, and you're probably going to get something good in there. And these are by far the most common watch movements that you're going to see. However, particularly nowadays, if you go on Amazon, there's a lot of low-priced automatic watches. Many of those are going to have Chinese-based movements inside of them, and oftentimes those Chinese movements are not going to last very long. And that goes for Chinese-based quartz movements as well. They tend to be not as accurate, more cheaply produced, and just not as reliable in general. So this is something you're going to see more commonly on lower end watches. If you're searching in the budget end of the Amazon spectrum, just be aware of that. Now, speaking of quartz versus automatic, this is more kind of a personal taste. A lot of times if you get a watch with a Japanese or Swiss automatic movement inside, that is another one of those indicators that they're not cutting corners. If they go through the trouble of putting in a Swiss or Japanese automatic movement as compared to like a quartz movement, they are spending more money, and typically the rest of the watch is also going to be of slightly higher quality. It's not a sure thing, but it's a good sign. If you're unfamiliar with the difference between quartz versus automatic watches, I've got a video on that. You can check it out. The main difference is, quartz watches, they run on a battery. They're more accurate. They tend to require less maintenance, and they're cheaper. Whereas automatic watches are just really cool. They are a mechanical piece that's run by a spring. It's a piece of technology that has been around for over 100 years, and it's basically the same today as it was then, before this whole computer and electricity and all of this stuff revolutionized everything and kind of cheapened a lot of stuff. So it's more an emotional thing, but it is kind of a cool mechanical thing too. If you're interested in engineering or mechanics or that kind of stuff, there's just something really cool about an automatic watch. The other thing is that the second hand on an automatic watch sweeps smoothly across the dial rather than ticking like a typical quartz movement, and a lot of people prefer that, especially when you get a quartz movement where the ticking doesn't quite line up with the second hand marks. That drives me kind of crazy, and I think a lot of people too. An automatic movement will sweep smoothly, and you don't have to worry about that. Third thing to look for a watch that has at least 50 meters of water resistance. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you're looking at specifically a dress watch, it's almost always going to have 30 meters of water resistance. What 30 meters of water resistance means, what it actually means, is that you can splash it or take it in the rain and it will probably be okay. If you drop it into water, there's a good chance it will break. 50 meters of water resistance, to me, that means that you could actually get away with probably doing a little bit of swimming in it. It's probably not a good idea. But if you dropped it in water, if you got it wet, if you fell into a pool, or jumped in the shower or into a pool and forgot to take the watch off, it would probably survive okay. So 50 meters of water resistance, I think, gives you the minimum amount of daily peace of mind to have a watch that's going to be safe from water. If you actually want to go swimming with the watch, make sure it has at least 100 meters of water resistance or more. And again, this is kind of that same thing. If you're looking at a watch that is not a dress watch, but it's only got 30 meters of water resistance, oftentimes that's an indication that the brand is kind of cutting corners. They haven't, really put a lot of thought into creating a higher quality piece. And so it's something that, I would generally stay away from. Again, always exceptions to these. Brands like Casio and Timex, a lot of times they'll have watches that are, 30 meter rated, but they sometimes tend to undersell it, and a lot of times those ones will work, kind of similar to how I would expect a 50 meter water resistance rating watch to work. Okay, fourth and final thing to look for. This is something that mostly you're going to see in lower end, cheaper watches, but look for a watch that does have a full stainless steel case. Particularly on Amazon right now, again, there's a lot of these Chinese brands that are coming in. They're offering some nice looking watches for really cheap money. And oftentimes they are good for the money. But if you're talking about a watch that's being sold for $15 that looks like a $50 watch, it's probably going to function like a $15 watch. So you get what you pay for. But an alloy case typically is not going to be as durable as a stainless steel case. What an alloy case is, it's going to have a cheaper metal, then it's going to be plated with something that looks nicer. And that plating can tend to wear off, and then after that plating wears off, the watch is not going to look nearly as nice as it did. A full stainless steel case is going to last much longer, be much more durable to nicks and scratches and that sort of thing. And again, it's just kind of a sign that the manufacturer is doing sort of the basic level of quality that you would expect in a watch. 316L stainless steel is, again, the standard for watch cases. Okay, so those are the four things that I always look for when I'm looking at the specs of a watch. And now whenever you're looking at a watch, if you're out in a store or if you're shopping around online, you can usually find these specs pretty easily, and you can tell if the watch is, sort of a decent watch. If you're going to sacrifice any of these three things, I'd say the first thing to go would be the sapphire crystal if you're looking for a budget watch. There's a lot of really great watches that have mineral crystals. They're going to last for a long time. They'll be a nice design. They'll be from a reputable brand, but the crystal will get scratched. And there are a ton of great watches under $200 that have those other three features, but not the sapphire crystal, that I think are great watches out there. Now, I mentioned there are a lot of exceptions. For instance, there's a lot of Chinese-based watch brands out there that are selling pretty incredible watches for the price that give you all of these specs at a really low price. But there are so many, but the quality on brands coming out of China has a huge variety. So if you don't really know what you're getting into, they can be a little bit iffy to look at. And I'm going to talk more about those in part 2 when I rank all the different brands that I'm kind of familiar with. And we'll talk through those and see how it works. So anyways, if you're interested in seeing that, make sure you check out part 2. That should be coming pretty soon. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I do watch reviews. I do lists of, good watches I think are good ones to look at for purchasing. And I do topics like this where we just talk about watches and, how to buy watches and think about watches and kind of fun stuff like that as well. So thank you guys for watching the show today, and hopefully I'll see you later. Talk to you later. Bye.